Okay. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We just finished another really engaging panel session on the other link. And now, we're continuing with the second lecture on the second day of the South Africa-Netherlands Cybersecurity School. I'm Nanette Saas. I'm a research fellow at the Center for Knowledge Dynamics and Decision Making at Stellenbosch University. And as one of the SA coordinators of the South Africa-Netherlands Cybersecurity School, you'll see me on some of the lecture days as well to be introducing our speakers. Today, I wish to extend a very warm welcome to the next speaker on this day, Charlotte Lindsey. Welcome, Charlotte. Charlotte is a Chief Public Policy Officer and Senior Humanitarian Advisor at the Cyber Peace Institute in Geneva. She's an experienced senior executive in digitalization of organizations, tech policy and diplomacy, multilateral engagement, data and digital risk, security and crisis management and communication. She has more than 30 years of experience in the humanitarian sector, including as Director of Communication and Information Management and Director of Digital Transformation and Data at the International Committee of the Red Cross, as well as a number of other positions in the context of armed conflicts. Today, Charlotte will be providing a lecture on attribution of cyber attacks, why it is important, and key challenges. Thank you, Charlotte, for contributing and sharing your expert knowledge with us, and the thanks students. The floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very pleased to be here. So good afternoon, everyone. So today I'm going to look at the very complex and sensitive area of cyber attribution. I will be sharing a presentation with you now, and hopefully it will open. Can everybody see that? I will go into slideshow. When I'm in slideshow, it means that I cannot always see you. We've organized for questions to be provided to me your questions to be provided to me by the moderators that are here. So we'll be looking at why it's important and what are some of the key challenges to cyber attribution. Firstly, just let me introduce you to the Cyber Peace Institute. So it is a not-for-profit, not NGO based in Geneva. We look at the frequency, impact and scale of cyber attacks with a view to trying to decrease the cyber attacks against vulnerable communities. We try to decrease the harms from cyber attacks, and we also look at how to demonstrate how international laws and norms are being violated, and then looking at how to advance measures for responsible behavior in cyberspace. You'll see on the screen some monitors that the Institute publishes. So cyber attacks in times of conflict, for example, looking at the Ukraine-Russia conflict, a cyber incident tracer looking at attacks on the healthcare sector during the pandemic, and the Cyber Peace Watch is a platform we're launching, which is looking at laws and norms and how it's being violated. As background, the Cyber Peace Institute doesn't itself attribute attacks or cyber incidents, but we monitor the attribution being made by others so that we can inform and raise public awareness in relation to attribution efforts. So that is our background. We are monitoring quite a lot of the threat landscape and then publishing information about threat actors, the impacts and harms of cyber incidences, and efforts for accountability. So what is attribution? And these slides you can have, so you don't need to write all of this. So attribution, it's actually a technical step for attaching a given act or omission to a relevant actor. So that basically means who has carried out the cyber incident, the cyber attack, the cyber operation. So it's really the process of identifying who the individuals are, who the groups are, who the nation states are that have been responsible for a cyber incident. And it's important to attribute because you need to be able to attribute to determine who is responsible for a violation and which is the appropriate legal framework according to which there has been a breach or a violation. And then you can also look at how do you establish the rights and obligations and what are the consequences of having carried out a cyber incident, cyber attack or operation. So attribution is a process of identifying who is responsible for a cyber incident or attack. And it's pivotal really in holding malicious actors accountable and also shaping strategies in terms of cybersecurity strategies and effective cyber engagement around what is happening in cyberspace. So why is it important? If you can't hold an actor accountable for a violation of the law, the laws will continue to be breached and there will continue to be violations. So you need to actually attribute an act to an actor. And that's what attribution in cyberspace is about. How the identifying what is the violation and then looking at the applicable law and then attributing it to a state or group or an individual. And that helps you to also understand the motives behind attacks, which can be important in terms of building cyber resilience. It can inform diplomatic, legal, military measures, and then enhance cybersecurity measures. So it's very important to carry out attribution because it helps to build greater accountability in cyberspace, or cyber resilience in cyberspace, the resilience of organizations against cyber attacks, but also then importantly, looking at diplomatic, legal, and potentially military responses to attacks. So what are some of the consequences of attribution? So there are many consequences, but particularly attributing an attack or violence against another state to a state can trigger the applicability of, for example, international humanitarian law, if it's in a situation of international armed conflict, or could trigger armed conflict. So the importance of attributing attacks or if you attribute an attack to a particular actor, what you are doing is saying this state or this individual or this group carried out this attack, and then you can look at what is the applicable framework. I think what is really important to understand, and people are very cautious about attribution because wrongly attributing an attack can have consequences, including triggering a response by a state. What is important is that any response to an attack attributable to another state should be in accordance with obligations under the Charter of the United Nations and and other international law, including, for example, the peaceful settlement of disputes. So if there is a cyber operation attack which is against another state, where a state may attribute that to a state, then you can see that there could be a recourse to the use of force, but that should be done under the obligations under the Charter of the UN, and that other means should be found to settle disputes. So what are the types of attribution? And I think that this is it's really important to recognize the three common forms of attribution are firstly the technical attribution, and that's when there is a forensic investigation looking at a malicious incident and looking at what are the origins of the attack. What's the platform? What's the software that was used? What's the hardware? What's the code? What's the modus operandi? Can you identify from the attack the technical means by which it was carried out? Because that is a process of being able to understand the particular indicators which might be attributable to a particular actor. And what you'll see in the attribution space, particularly around the malicious use of cyber, is that there are particular signatures, digital signatures, modus operandi, which are attributed to particular actors or groups that can help to identify who those groups are. So looking at the tactics, the techniques, the procedures is really important to on a technical level. And that's really a forensic technical investigation of what is happening. The second form of attribution is a political attribution, and that's the determination or the disclosure generally by a state, of who is the party that's responsible for an attack, which could be a nation state actor, could be a state-sponsored group or criminal group or a collective, and I will come to these different types of actors. And that's based on an analysis, an assessment, a judgment of what has, of the particular cyber incident or attack. And so that's maybe based on some form of technical attribution, but it's a political decision to disclose or determine who is the actor behind the attack. And then you have a legal attribution. And a legal attribution is determining who is responsible based on the technical means, identifying the origin of the attacker, and then looking at ascribing particular legal consequences to that, and then taking action. Could be through a court, could be the imposition of sanctions, etc. And as I mentioned before, attribution of a cyber attack under international law may trigger the application of UN Charter, the international humanitarian law, state responsibility, and or activate the right to response in self-defense. So getting attribution right is really important. And what you do find is that the attribution of responsibility for a cyber attack to a particular group should be based on evidence, which is generally should be of a technical and a legal nature. So I think that's a very important aspect, looking at these three types of attribution. What I will focus now on is giving some examples of cyber attacks from what we have been monitoring for the last 2 years in relation to the conflict going on between Ukraine and the Russian Federation. That's an important conflict because of the use of cyber in addition to the kinetic action, more traditional forms of warfare that we can witness on the TV screens. So we've monitored 3,225 cyber attacks and operations carried out by a range of different threat actors. To date, we have 126 different threat actors that we've been monitoring. And we've been looking at cyber attacks that affect the critical infrastructure which is essential for the survival of the civilian population. And so that under international law, that might that's important that civilians are protected and that infrastructure essential for the survival of civilian population is also protected. So in looking at that, what we have done is collected information about the attack that's in the public domain or the darknet, and from other sources of information that we have from partners, where we collect the data around these attacks. We look at the modus operandi, we look at the threat actor, we look at the target, and we identify trends, patterns, and an analysis from that, which we then publish on a quarterly basis. What we can see, and this is all public, so you can access this platform. We look at particularly, is there a timeline around the attacks? What are the types of details of the attack? But also geopolitically, where are the attacks happening? And what we see is that some 58 different countries have been attacked so far, linked to the Russian and Ukrainian conflict, but that are not the two belligerent countries themselves. So that's very interesting to see that there are attacks that are happening linked to the conflict, but are outside the two countries themselves that are at war. So if we look at the types of attacks that we see, on the left-hand side, you'll see this chart, which looks at the sorts of types of incidents that you can see. And we frame really around 4 different types of cyber attack. So destructive attacks that are aiming to destroy systems, destroy data, destroy the functioning of an organization or infrastructure and systems. So that's typically a wiperware, malware, ransomware. Then we see disruptive attacks, and disruptive attacks are aiming to generally temporarily disrupt the functioning. They're not destroying data or systems, but they are disrupting their functioning. And typically you see defacement of websites, you see DDoS attacks, so distributed denial of service attacks that are taking down, disrupting the system by an overload of traffic to a particular site or to a system. Then we have what's data weaponization, or what often linked to hack and leak operations or cyber espionage or ransomware, where data, where there's an infiltration into the system, and then there may be an exfiltration of data or a monitoring and of the data that is there, which can be the precursor to another attack, which could be a destructive or disruptive attack. And then we see disinformation and propaganda, so cyber influence operations. And these are where operations are carried out, which are really providing false, misleading information with a view to spreading fear, terror, etc. What you can see in relation to the Ukraine-Russian conflict is an enormous amount of DDoS, so distributed denial of service attacks, and primarily outside the two belligerent countries. So that's indicative of that particular conflict related to the critical infrastructure. You'll see that there are a lot of attacks that are happening that are targeting other countries who may have demonstrated support for one or the other belligerent countries. So there's, if, for example, membership to NATO or the transfer of weapons to one of the countries, or support for membership to the European Union, or signing up to sanctions. What we have seen after those, there can be attacks that are taking place in those countries. I give you this as a preface to who are the actors in attribution. And coming back to the question of attribution, you can see in relation to this particular conflict that the vast majority of attacks have actually, and the attribution of the attacks have not been done according to the three different types of attribution that I mentioned. So technical, legal, and political. There's actually a large range of what are called self-attributed attacks. And that's quite a phenomenon around this conflict, where threat actors, malicious actors have come out and they have carried out an attack, but they haven't kept it quiet. They're quite loud and proud about the attacks they carried out. And they're actually saying this attack was carried out by us as a particular group. And what the chart on the left shows you is the different types of groups that have been carrying out these attacks. And they're primarily collectives or hacktivist groups, those who are patriotic to one party or the other, that are carrying out attacks on behalf of one, or in the name of, or in support of the objectives of one of the other two belligerent states, so Ukraine or Russia. So you see that these collective or hacktivist groups are by far the biggest range of actors that have been carrying out these self-attributed attacks in relation to the conflict in Ukraine and Russia. And I think self-attribution is a very interesting aspect there, because often actors do not want to have an attribution to them of an attack because of the risk of accountability. And what we've seen prior to this conflict is actors, and can be the same actors that are now self-attributing, the actors have denied that they have carried out an attack, or the state from within which they are operating has said that those actors are not operating from within their territory. I think with self-attribution, which is this is being carried out within the framework of an international armed conflict, and parties and actors are self-attributing that they're carrying out these attacks, that will be very interesting to see if there are attacks which are perceived to have been in breach of laws and norms, if there will be some sort of mechanism of accountability after the conflict is over, or indeed as the conflict is continuing. And that could be at the level of a domestic court or regional court, or indeed could be a submission to the International Criminal Court. So you see this big pink block of self-attributed attacks, and I think that's a very interesting phenomena to continue to assess what the implications of that mean, and then also to see if there are particularly legal attributions that are made in relation to those attacks, and then whether there are consequences of that either before a court or indeed in other domains. So I mentioned this aspect of self-attribution. So actors are publicly disclosing a cyber attack, and they're attributing it to themselves as the actor behind the attack. And what we've seen in relation to the conflict between Ukraine and Russia is that groups are quite vocal about having carried out attacks and have shown no hesitation in attributing their attacks to themselves. There are still attacks that we haven't been able to find any public information in relation to who the attack is carried out. So there's still a group of attacks that we have not been able to attribute to an actor. If you look at how that shows how incidents are evolving over time in Ukraine, is you can see that there is an increasing number of volume of attacks that are happening outside Ukraine and Russia. And so that will be very interesting to assess if any states in which an attack has been carried out, if at any point they themselves attribute an attack that has been carried out. There has the Viasat attack, which is an attack which is against wind turbines, has seen as a spillover attack into Germany, and there is, and that's something where there is a case being brought by the company that was affected in that regard, and so it will be interesting to look at prosecutions as they go forward in relation to attacks that have been carried out in the rest of the world by actors which are operating from in one of the other belligerent countries. So what are some of the challenges of cyber attribution? So as I mentioned, attribution, it's a very complex field. There's quite a lot of difficulty in attributing attacks because of issues of anonymity, obfuscation of attacks, so people that don't state who they are or obfuscate their attacks. So they use techniques, or they use processes and procedures that are hiding behind something. So it's very difficult to identify or trace back who the actor is. And the complexity of the digital environment means that it's very challenging to trace back some of attacks to their origin, because they may go through other countries, they may go through proxy servers. So there could be false flags. So a malicious actor may employ false flags, so misleading investigators by attributing attacks to other entities. So they're carrying out an attack and then leaving a trail that would indicate it's carried out by somebody else. Sophisticated actors may also mimic the techniques of other groups, so they can sow confusion. So you have to be very careful that you can actually look and really trace that back to the origin. So the use of proxy servers or anonymization tools also complicates the tracing of attacks, and attackers can leverage technologies and emerging technologies to conceal who their true identity is. So actually identifying who are the attackers may be very, very difficult to do. And there are certain methodologies in place to really try to identify who are attackers. And they can be, as I mentioned, around technical indicators. So looking at the malware signatures, looking at code similarities, looking at the infrastructure, can be looking at the studying the network traffic patterns or IP addresses. All of these could be ways of giving technical indications of who the attackers are. There's also behavioral analysis, so looking at the tactics, the techniques, the procedures of attackers, and helping to profile different threat actors. And that can look at their motivations. It can be looking at their objectives behind attacks, behind their targets. So behavioral analysis can support and supplement technical indicators. And then there's also geopolitical context. So considering what is the geopolitical landscape to help in understanding of particularly state-sponsored or proxy attacks and their motives. So that can be a way. You can look at what's the time that the attack was carried out. Was it done in a particular, did it avoid particular public holidays in countries where the attackers may come from? Does it avoid, is there code which would avoid attacking a particular language script? There are all sorts of things that can give an indication of who the attackers are. In addition, I think the challenges of cyber attribution. So there are clearly serious implications linked to attribution. Attributing attacks can lead to the sorts of consequences that I mentioned: sanctions, use of force, accountability aspects in a court of law. So it's because of these implications of attribution that can make it particularly challenging. So there could be legal ramifications. So a cyber action attribution which could lead to legal actions against identified perpetrators mean that often actors who are carrying out malicious acts will try to hide the identity of the group. So there are international laws and agreements evolving to address cybercrimes and establish norms for responsible behavior in cyberspace. And so, though that could be that leveraging the normative framework and calling and negotiations between states can also come about because of an implication of an attribution. There's also aspects that are linked to the implications of an attribution because you could escalate risks of greater problems. So if you misattribute a cyber attack, it can lead to diplomatic tensions. It can lead to potential escalation. So it's very important that attribution is evidence-based. It takes time to do this, that it's complex, but that it's thorough, because you have to be able to strike a balance between the response to and a restraint to ensure there's no unintended consequences. The implications of an attribution can also be by publicly attributing an attack. It can serve as a deterrent, so discouraging future malicious activities. And you do see some of this political attribution as a form of deterrent to say, we know that this actor or actors inside a country have carried out an attack. And as a form of deterrence. So it is really important to recognize that there are sort of implications of doing this. I think other factors which are complex are often, there are no borders in cyberspace, as there are countries have borders. So it does require, so an attack may happen from outside the territory of one country, inside the territory of another. And so it requires cross-border cooperation and collaboration, particularly in identifying and holding accountable a threat actor, a malicious threat actor. I mentioned it requires a really comprehensive response. So this ability to understand forensically the technical aspects of an attack, looking then at the geopolitical aspect, looking at what is on international peace and security, and then looking at what is the normative, the legal framework that is applicable, and then looking at how to apply that. And I think some of the frustration of accountability of attribution over recent years has been that there is a growing capability of technical attribution that may come from the private sector, from tech companies which are, for example, running the technical networks and are also themselves a victim of attacks. But at the same time, it requires a state response and state engagement to do something, because the actor is operating outside the territory of the country where the attack has happened, and therefore there has a bearing on international peace and security or geopolitical tensions. And you've seen that in recent years. For example, before the 2022 military invasion by Russia into Ukraine, there was a high-level meeting between the president of Russia and the president of America here in Switzerland, in Geneva, where one aspect on the agenda was discussing cyber attacks. and how to put a stop to attacks happening against critical infrastructure, according to what was reported in the media. And so you will see that these diplomatic efforts are taking place, not often aware of what that means in the public space. So what I will do is I will maybe conclude there with just a couple examples that demonstrate the sort of challenges of this. So there are a few cases where of attribution, for example, Stuxnet, which is a very famous attack which happened in 2010, which is widely believed to have been carried out by America and Israel, designed to target Iran's nuclear program, particularly its uranium enrichment facilities. And this appears to be an attack planned and carried out over many years, which was carrying out some sort of physical using cyber means, but actually carrying out to physically destabilize the uranium enrichment facilities. Of course, it's never been publicly acknowledged who the actors are behind this, but it did have an impact on Iran's nuclear program. Another attack took place in 2017 called Notpetaya, which was initially thought of as a ransomware attack. It was later attributed by a number of countries to Russian state-sponsored actors, which led to widespread damage, including to critical infrastructure, transport sector, where many companies were affected with their infrastructure just taken offline because they could no longer access their computers safely. I think probably one of the more famous attacks is WannaCry, which was in 2017 too. This was well known as initially looked at ransomware, exploiting vulnerabilities in Microsoft's Windows systems and affected organizations worldwide. Perhaps one of the most famous was the National Health Service in the UK. And this has come out, there has been a political attribution, so i.e. where a state has come out and politically stated that this is an act carried out by a particular party. The UK government stated that it was actors inside North Korea. So again, it didn't say it was the North Korean government, it said it was actors operating inside North Korea. That's considered as a political attribution. And then lastly, 2020 was also SolarWinds, which is linked to Russian hackers, where there was a targeting of the US government agencies and private companies, compromising software updates to gain unauthorized access to systems. And this has been attributed to Russian hackers. So this gives you an example of the sort of types of attacks that are being carried out, where there have been attributions. Tech companies have also taken some actors through a legal process in relation to the technical attribution that they've carried out, and then carrying out legal attribution or legal cases on the back of those attribution. That could be linked to, for example, infiltration or putting of spyware onto on compromising systems to place malware or spyware into systems. So I will stop the presentation there. I will stop sharing and I can answer any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Charlotte. Very interesting presentation. And yes, we would like to ask the students if they have any questions to please raise their hands and then we'll unmute you. I see there's some waiting. I'll start with those. Okay, Venu Kamachi, you can ask your questions. You will have to unmute yourself now. You are allowed to use the microphone. Yeah, I'm going to go to the next person. Silendokule.
You hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm sorry, ma'am. I've got a Wi-Fi network problem here, so I was just asking.
Are you still there, Silendokule? Okay, I'm gonna.
Oh, yeah.
Are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay.
As you can see that I've got network problems. I was just asking on where can you get the recordings, because they said the lecturers are being recorded. Even yesterday's lecture was being recorded as well. So I just wanted to know where can we find it.
They will be put on a YouTube channel. But they, Stephanie, they're not available just yet, are they?
Yeah, they're not available just yet, but they will be made available in the next coming days. We have to edit them and upload them to YouTube. And as we do that, we'll also be sending out an email via Eventbrite to everyone with the link to the recordings. So yeah, I understand that some of you have internet issues and it's hard to watch the whole thing from start to finish, but you should be able to in the next coming days.
Can we maybe, sorry, Silendokule, if you have any questions for Charlotte, I think that's what we want for now. And then we can answer other questions rather afterwards.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks. I'm going to go to Emmanuel. You can now talk.
Hi, Charlotte. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I have a question. Is there any practice maybe within law that can be applied to assist let's say a country with less resources? For example, let's say a country A, or an attack has came from a country A and then to a country B, but then the country B that the attack has taken place doesn't have like enough resources or laws or any practice in place. Like is there any assistance that, you know, maybe it's a general practice that any let's say a bystander or in a country that want to assist, that it can apply, that maybe it's applied maybe internationally? Is there such a practice?
Yes, there is, in that there is cooperation between states in trying to build A, capacity, and B, also the capabilities of countries to be able to implement laws and norms. And I think today what we can see in a global cyberspace is that our security is so interdependent that it's important that all countries really have build up cyber capabilities in terms of understanding their own cyber threat landscape and their cyber resilience. And so what you do see is cooperation between countries trying to support different countries to increase their capabilities. Under the United Nations open-ended working group, which is developing the normative framework, there are 11 norms which have been developed a few years ago under a UN process, and one of those is also about the SATs, or the support systems that need to be in place, and that there should be increased resilience in countries. So there are efforts to build capabilities and capacities, as well as information sharing capabilities between different countries. But I think that definitely needs to be more resourcing in that regard.
Okay, thank you. I think I understand you.
Okay, thanks. Natalie Monda, you have a question? Natalie, you'll have to unmute yourself. You can use the mic.
Oh, good evening.
Good evening.
My question was about the recordings, but we've already been told about it. So yeah,
All
thank
right.
you.
Okay. Can I ask everyone who has a question about the recordings or something unrelated to Charlotte's talk? Maybe you could lower your hand and we can just move on to the questions for her. Wesley Mentumbu, you're next. You're unmuted, so. Wazi, we can't hear you. There's some buzz on the line. Do you want to try again? Okay, I think you're having a connection probably. I'm just going to move on for now. Just hold on till you see. Patla Maloka, do you have a question for Charlotte?
Hello, thank you very much for this opportunity. I have a question for Charlotte. This is with regards to the technical investigation, with regards to the forensic investigation. So what happens if you find out that you have been misled on the investigation, and actually the attribution doesn't actually belong to the person you found out, it actually belongs to someone else? And the second question is, how do you fix the issue of political attribution in terms of finding out that a group of people in Iran were hacking your servers, and then how do you cooperate with the government? How do you move on to the legal attribution in terms of that? Thank you.
So great questions. Thank you. I think that on the technical attribution, so the forensic side, I think that is where it's absolutely critical that there aren't any public pronouncements made before there is definitive information which is conclusive about who the threat actor is, because of the risk of miscalculation, misattribution. So that is why generally these things take a lot of time. That might be that these, and you will see reports that are being put out by big technical actors that are running networks and are running the systems that we all rely on, that put out their own technical reports, and they might, and within that may attribute that action to particular actors, the threat actors that are known to them. So you see that from on that side. From the governments, you rarely, or it's much less often that you will see those sort of technical attributions made public. That doesn't mean to say that they're not doing something behind the scenes. It's just not in the public space. So it might be that they have information there's about a malicious threat actor, and they would have bilateral confidential discussions with the state concerned where the actor is operating from, in order to try to take measures of accountability and to put a stop in the first place to that sort of action. On the political side, what you will say, and where a statement like that will be made, is being made, it's signaling that we know where the attack is emanating from, without actually saying, for example, that it was the state that did it. But there is a state responsibility to ensure that malicious acts are not taking place from within its territory against someone else. So it still does signal that the country is aware of where the act emanated from, without saying it was a specific act or attributing it to the government, but sending a strong message of, we know, and you have a responsibility to put a stop to such attacks. And that may be a deterrence for future attacks, but it's a strong signaling element where maybe there's not, they don't believe that there would be an ability to actually engage on a legal case, for example, which may take a lot longer to put in process, or that there may not be relations between the two countries in order to take action. And it's because of the geopolitical landscape, it may be not at the right moment to actually come out and accuse a state. But it may also mean that a lot of things are happening bilaterally in a confidential way. So I think that we should, because we don't know about it in the public space, doesn't mean to say it's not necessarily happening, but there might be a strong signaling and a strong call that there should be a deterrence of that, because all states are responsible to ensure that malicious acts do not take place from their territory against another state.
Thank you, Patla, for the question, Charlotte for your answer. Malukabe, you have a question for Charlotte?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you, Charlotte, for the wonderful presentation. My question to you really is regarding frameworks. Do we have any framework that one can employ in order to make sure that their attribution is not filled with a lot of flaws? And just to make sure, you know, there's a kind of standard that one can follow to ensure that the attribution is executed flawlessly.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's probably not unanimity around what standard for attribution is. I think there's a lot of work that is being done in the normative space and also around in the academic space in order to ensure that there is greater awareness around attribution and more standards around attribution. I think what is important is that we recognize that it's a highly complex field, that it's really, really important to ensure that is an evidence-based approach, and that some of the frameworks that are being developed that looking at sort of the attribution space are peer-reviewed and assessed to ensure that their applicability and to develop support for them as they move forward.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Moving on to Sebulelo. You have a question for Charlotte. You can unmute yourself if you have a question. Okay, I'm moving on because we're running a bit low on time here. Lindsey, I'm allowing your mic. Do you have a question for Charlotte?
Thank you very much for such an opportunity. Please, I want to ask if an attacker, how can you attribute an attacker using botnets for multiple DDoS attack on a particular target? How can you attribute that as a collective or as a single or as a self-attributed person? That's my question.
So if I heard all of your question about botnets, attackers were carrying out multiple different attacks, I think what is really important to understand is how the victim of an attack will actually perceive that attack and what response they will give, especially if it's happening at a state level. So I think it's really important to recognize that if an attack is happening against an individual or an organization or at state level, it is how that is interpreted and what action that they may then take. States don't signal necessarily the threshold of what they would consider an attack, of which level it would need to reach before they would take action. And I think that's where it's really important to recognize that there can be miscalculation in cyberspace, where something that is seen as maybe not a destructive attack, but is causing disruption, may end up being attributed or actors called out in that regard because the victim of that attack is actually perceiving and viewing the impact, harm, effects of that as reaching a certain threshold. And those thresholds are not necessarily communicated for obvious reasons, because then people would keep their attack below a certain threshold before, because they would know that if it surpassed that threshold. And is that as part of the UN open-ended working group on ICT, so responsible behavior in cyberspace, there are 11 norms that states are discussing the implementation of those norms. And in relation to that, states have also been asked to put forward their positions of what they would consider, how they consider the application of international law in cyberspace. And so states are putting forward their positions of what sorts of types of attacks they would consider that would therefore reach a threshold for example, of breach of their sovereignty or as an act of force. And so states are clarifying at a national level and then sharing those clarifications at the international level through the UN of what they would, the types of attacks that they would consider as being as breach of sovereignty, act of force, or a cyber attack. And I think there you can start to see states who've put forward interference in election or interference in the capacity of a state to act. Attacks on critical infrastructure like healthcare since the pandemic. You can start to see those clarifications. And therefore, it's important to continue to monitor how states themselves are clarifying what they would consider as potential breaches in those regards.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lindsey. We got time for maybe one or two more questions. Lumar, you have a question for Charlotte. Lumar, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay, I'm moving on to the next one. Puyo. You have a question? Puyo, Monjeni, you can ask your question. You unmute your mic, please.
Hi, good day all. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, yes. Hi, Charlotte. I think maybe you've partly answered my question on when you answered Denzi, when you explained on Denzi's, because I wanted to find out how would attribution would be carried out when attacks are carried out on individuals. Like, you know, recently, I think in South Africa, we've been having a lot of individuals that you know, whether it's through phishing and that kind of stuff, you find that there are cyber attacks on individuals. How can attribution then be carried out in that regard, so as to strengthen perhaps how to in a way to protect individuals? Because I think many of individuals aren't aware of you know, the brutality of cyber attacks, especially when one is using their mobile phones.
Yes, another great question. I think there's where I've been looking at attacks that have been carried out by malicious actors that often have geopolitical connotations. Obviously, you have criminal groups that are working in that space too. And then you have attacks that are really also happening at this individual level against people, the citizens of a country. I think there what's really important is to recognize that there are you know, what's illegal offline is illegal online. So if they're carrying out attacks which would be illegal offline, so then they are also assume that should be illegal online. And therefore you can have recourse to the national police authorities, you can have recourse to national cybersecurity centers who are collecting information about attacks that are happening in their country so that they can provide alerts and warnings to the citizens about what is happening. So that people should therefore use national mechanisms which are there in order to prevent crimes happening or to hold people accountable for crimes that are happening or for victim assistance. So I think there are mechanisms at a national level in countries that are linked to criminal processes, criminal justice, and accountability for victims. And I think there you can see police forces, you can see, and also particularly national cybersecurity centres that can provide information and alerts on what is happening to protect and to help people understand the threat landscape to them as individuals.
Thank you.
Thank you, Viju. One more question, Charlotte? Okay, next on the list, Sudumo. You can use your mic now, Sudumo. Okay, I think that Sudumo, we can't hear you. I'm going to move on to the next one. Shuaib, would you like to ask your question, please? Yeah, I think that just disappeared. Sona, I think you had tried earlier. Yes, you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Please ask your question.
My question, it's not a question, but I'm looking for solutions on all the cyber attacks. It's all about solution. I've been hearing questions, but I want solutions on implementing on cyber attacks through organizations and companies. Yeah, I'm all about solutions. So what are the solutions on implementing in cybersecurity and cyber attacks?
I mean, definitely each individual organization and national level have to increase their cyber resilience, so their capabilities to understand both their threat landscape, but also how to improve their behavior to minimize the both the risk of an attack, but also then the impact of an attack. So I think that's absolutely critical. I think on the second level, it's collaboration and coordination amongst a range of actors. It's such a complex operating environment and geopolitical environment. It does require an ecosystem to respond to the challenges of cyber attacks. So it is necessary to have information sharing, collaboration, capacity building, and sharing, threat intelligence sharing, awareness and resource capabilities in order to secure us all in cyberspace. So there's no easy fix, there's no easy answer to that other than cyber awareness, cyber capability, capacity building, and supporting information sharing, and helping us all to have better resilience in cyberspace.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Charlotte. That was
Thank
a very very inspiring talk and good session with good questions. Thank you very much, everyone. We're closing for today. We'll see hopefully a lot of you again, if not all of you, tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.